Hello. A few years back I watched a series of videos by Matthew from World Building Corner where he explained how he created his fantasy world. It is an excellent world in my opinion that manages to be both realistic and fantastical. In fact, I only have one problem with that series, and that's in the video on intelligent animals. And no, it's not the whole intelligent animals must look human part. Not only have people already talked in length about it, but Matthew made it clear that he wanted them to look that way. No, my issue is with which animals he said could and could not evolve intelligence. One of the creatures he said couldn't do it was a crocodilian type creature, which is kinda what inspired me to make this video, because I don't know if I agree with that and I kinda saw it as a challenge. Okay, to set the rules of unlikely intelligence, I will make a species based on a creature that I like. I will inject it with a legally distinct, totally not kern virus, and seed a planet with it, and then guide it towards technological progress and civilization. I will change them physically as needed, as long as they still resemble the creature they originated from more than any other. And if they get stuck, I will have the humans of the story help them progress. It's okay, this isn't a competition. So, let's begin. Planet Kyriew is a warm, verdant world with huge expanses of tropical and subtropical wetlands. Other environments also exist, but this will be the ideal one for crocodilians, including our species, Anthroposuchus sapiens. But what would that species of crocodilian look like? First of all, the brain. The bigger the brain cavity, the less room there is for jaw muscles, which is a big disadvantage for crocodilians especially, but maybe not as much as you think. Being technically dinosaurs, birds are the closest relatives of crocodilians, and their brains are denser than those of mammals, which allows for higher intelligence in a smaller space. It doesn't negate the problem altogether, but it minimizes it a lot. The body is a little trickier. Obviously, they will need arms and hands. Making them bipedal isn't that hard. Prehistoric relatives of crocodilians had already done that. In fact, it might actually be easier for them than it was for humans, because the long tail can provide balance, so they can afford to have their body more horizontal to the ground than the completely vertical posture of humans. They will also probably need a higher metabolism to fuel that brain, but that's also something the ancestors of crocodilians evolved naturally, as they were warm-blooded active predators. It might also be possible for them to switch between states of high and low metabolism, but I don't know how that would affect the brain. The eyes are my biggest problem. They are on top of the head, and they also have a long snout because they're crocodilians, and they also have relatively short arms, so it would be really hard for them to look at what they are holding or what they are about to hold. I want to move their eyes a little bit, but not too much, because they will still have to look like crocodiles. So I'll probably just give them really flexible necks and have them tilt their head a lot. So, starting off with their equivalent of early prehistory, these crocodilians will form stronger and stronger social bonds and bigger groups. Already, crocodilians hunt schools of fish in groups by circling them, so with bigger and bigger brains, they will be able to form more and more complex hunting methods, which will require more and more teamwork. The implementation of tools like nets and spears will also help with that, and they will be incentivized to use those because their anatomy will make them slower swimmers than the non-sapient crocodilians. Speaking of non-sapient crocodilians, those will most likely be driven to extinction by the sapient ones, because that's kinda what humans did to other apes that had the same needs as they did. And land animals won't be safe either, as despite being even slower on land than in the water, those crocodilians will be able to ambush them or even lead them to traps that they've made. Non-sapient crocodilians, once again, are able to memorize the patterns of when and where animals drink water and wait for them. So the sapient ones could develop that even more. Spears will be useful here too, but another useful tool will be knives. For all their crushing power, the teeth of crocodiles can't exactly slice their prey. So if they don't want to roll over repeatedly every time they want to take a bite, they will most likely use knives for that. Spears, knives and other such weapons, however, won't just be aimed at other species. All social creatures go to war sometimes, and these ones will be no exception. At some point, different tribes will need to compete for resources and territory, so I believe war is inevitable. How will they do that? You might think their natural armor is enough to protect them, and it might from some hits from the back, but in war, in the battlefield, most of the hits come from the front, which is where their scales would be the weakest. So at the very least they will have to wear a cuirass, or hold a shield. In fact, they might be able to dual-wield shields, as they can still use their jaws and tails to attack one another. They can also potentially attach weapons on their heads and tails, but I believe it will be easier to just hold them on their hands, or bite one another. Since they are semi-aquatic, they will also clash in the water. Will that be a mix of naval warfare and whatever military divers are doing? I literally cannot imagine because I'm too terrestrial for that. Let's now move on to the agricultural age. Unlike humans, these animals are fully carnivorous, so I don't think they will grow crops, at least not to the same extent that humans did. Instead, their agriculture will be around fish farms. American alligators dig channels in the mud that can connect different bodies of water. So sapient crocodilians can expand on this and create artificial ponds or tidal pools. That means that for completely different reasons than humans, they too will settle in river valleys and coasts. Other animals will also be domesticated. Capybaras are a very likely candidate, as they are docile herbivores that gather in large groups, and they can be used for food or clothing. Some species of birds nest next to the crocodiles and will alert them when something approaches either nest. Our crocodilians could perhaps use a similar type of bird as a guard dog or guard bird, I guess. And you can't have a version of dogs without a version of cats, which for them I believe will be frogs, at least in the fresh water. I can't think of a coastal or tidal animal that will be used as pest control without being a threat to the crocodile hatchlings. With agriculture, they will create a calendar and a written language, both because they need to catalog the yield and the seasons or tides, or both. Their hierarchy will also get more stratified. Alright, I forgot to talk about that. Crocodilian society is most likely to be patriarchic, with the largest male being the leader. In the tribal hunter-gatherer level, the leader won't have much difference from the underlings. But in an agricultural society, the leader will accumulate more and more power until he eventually rules like a king, with a high class of warriors that he may or may not lead directly, and a lower class of warriors further divided into craftsmen and unskilled laborers. I was going to talk about their historical period here, but unless something really dramatic happens, it probably won't change all that much, so instead I will talk about the things about their culture that I couldn't fit anywhere else. Clothes are uncomfortable to wear in the water, so they most likely won't invent them. But they will still need protection from the sun, so they might instead use parasols. And I know they will be big and made of leaves, but I like the idea of a large intimidating crocodile using a little pink umbrella made of delicate fabric. Another thing they won't have is stories about dragons, because quite frankly they are the dragons to everything else. What would even be the monsters of their mythology? I imagine a chimera of different nest raiders, like python, mustelid and hermit crab all mixed into one, or maybe a griffon with the head of a seagull and the body of a hyena. Crocodiles are also more resistant to certain diseases than humans, so it might take longer for them to develop medicine to the same extent, and it might also allow them to live in more crowded cities and settlements. Many modern crocodilians will sometimes eat the babies of other members of their species, and I think the sapient crocodilians will do that in the beginning, but as they become more and more civilized, they will eventually stop this practice and view it as something barbaric their ancestors did that they are ashamed of now. It will be much easier for them to invent boats and much harder for them to invent land vehicles, at least in any practical way, so they will be much more connected by water than by land. What sports will be popular in their culture? Swimming, obviously, but also some display of strength, either jumping out of the water or crushing things with their jaws. Music will also be very important. American alligators will sing to attract females. It's more of a deep growl, but still. So, I believe this will be developed further in the sapient crocodilians. Different cultures can develop according to the environment. Away from the equator, you can have tribes that hibernate during the cold seasons, and in hot deserts, you can have tribes that stay in their dens all day and only come out at night when they do all of their work to avoid overheating. Can the crocodilians industrialize? Well, I mentioned that they canonically live on a seed world, which by definition wouldn't have any fossil fuel, but I find that unfair because it's not the result of their biology. So I will just say that they can domesticate some very energy-dense species of algae and cultivate controlled blooms of it to use as fuel. How will that affect them? Well, there will be positives and negatives. The positives are that their production and transfer of goods will be much more efficient, and they might even be able to settle regions of the planet that they wouldn't have otherwise, like inland away from rivers, up on mountains, near the poles or even on them, and out in the open ocean. Also, the daily life of the average crocodilian would be a lot easier due to all the automation. On the negative side, the algae farms will be just as devastating for the environment as our fossil fuel. First of all, they have a tendency to kill fish, like the fish that these crocodilians rely on for food, but they also tend to store carbon dioxide, which means that they will turn their world cooler instead of warmer. There is a correlation between colder global temperatures and smaller size in crocodilians, but it will also dry up all the river valleys and coasts that they call home. It is true that the crocodilians are more resistant to environmental disaster than the humans are, so it might take them even longer to take action than it took for humans. But I also have faith that they won't be as stupid, so I'll have them take action as soon as they notice, even though it will take longer to actually affect them. Let's say it evens out or something. Oh, I also forgot to mention, industrialization will make their culture more egalitarian, because physical strength won't be as important as it was in the past. So smaller males and females will have just as much of a chance at leadership as larger males, paving the way for a society built on equality. Am I projecting because the only thing I have in comparison are humans? Maybe, but it just comes out that way. I didn't plan on it. Okay, what's next? I think the only thing that remains is whether or not they can get into space. I believe that they could if they made it this far. If they have access to chemical fuel and metal, it will be possible for them to develop rockets and spaceships. And solar power isn't that hard to invent. Worst case scenario, we have the humans come down and help them with that one last step, but that's it. And that's where it ends, I guess. I feel like I made their civilization and history much too similar to that of humans, more so than I'd want, but it kinda just became that way as I was writing. Maybe the next animal I will do will be weirder and more unique. I'm thinking of either a tiny mammal or maybe an insect. See you then, but also in other videos that I will make before that. Goodbye for now.